you talked in your annual conference presentation about how you have used dance as kind of a form of non-traditional worship in your own worship life. Can you talk about that experience and how that affected you and grew your personal relationship with God?
Well, I could talk about dance all day. I have been dancing for a long time. When I was in about ninth grade, we started a dance team at my church. And so I got to dance with that group of people all throughout high school and throughout college. My college actually had a dance team that I joined while I was there. And so I've been able to use dance in worship. It's such a freeing experience. In church, usually you come in, you sit down, you sing, you stand up, and kind of all of the traditional expectations. But in dance, it's anything goes. There's nothing like putting expression and emotion to the words of a song, really bringing to life what the musician is trying to convey. And when I get to dance by myself, when it's just me, there's just such a connection for me with me and God, and it's just us. And everyone else just gets to watch and experience that moment, but it really is very personal for me. And it's hard to put into words the experience that I have when I get to dance before God.
Great. And just hearing about the excitement and experiences that you've had in dance, it excites me because it just shows the diversity that people can have in worship experiences, and I'm very grateful for that because I have two left feet and I could barely dance in my wedding. So it's always really great to be able to hear that something I know could never do, that could be such a powerful instrument for people to get closer to God. So thank you for sharing your story there. And so as we're talking about more of that diversity of worship experiences and types of worship, do you know of any other types of worship where young adults have been able to grow because of something that was maybe not what you would find on a Sunday morning in every church?
Yeah, I've got to see all sorts of expressions of artistic creativity in worship. So drama is a really neat way to see people bring out their theatrical side, which is not a gift of mine, but it's fun to engage in worship in that way. One of the most unique experiences that I've had watching someone else express their artistic creativity was through painting. And there was a painter on stage while the pastor was preaching, and they painted what they heard, basically. And so at the end, it was this beautiful piece of artwork that could be displayed that was their expression of their faith and of what they were hearing. And it really drew you in and made you pay attention because like I said, the artwork expressed the message. And so it was just this beautiful piece of and an extension of who they were.
And in these examples that you've brought up, you've talked a lot about this ability for expression, and you've talked a lot about this big emotional component. And a lot of times, emotion's something that's either downplayed or even tried to get out of worship as well. So why do you think that there's sometimes that hesitancy to keep emotion out of worship or to keep people from being emotional in worship, I guess?
That's a great question. I think we're afraid. I think that in expressing our emotions and how we feel lends us to vulnerability, and we're afraid to let go and let loose. And what will the person next to me think if I'm crying or if I'm laughing or if I'm really moved by that piece of music? We're so concerned about what's happening around us that we often forget about why we gather and why we worship and why we're even able to express ourselves through those creative means. And so we suppress a lot of how we feel in worship so that we can keep with the 1 hour in and out mentality.
Yeah. So to have you think a little bit about this, can you think of any ways to, I guess, get over those emotional barriers that we put up when we go to church? Or
I think it starts in creating, again, back to the relationships. It's the space. So creating relationships with the people who sit next to us, creating relationships among the congregation as a whole, I think is the most helpful, to know that I trust you and you trust me, and so this is a safe space, and it's okay to express however I need to express myself in this moment. It's how the Spirit's moving, and being able to be aware of that and allow God to move among our worship in ways that we're not expecting, and just being open to each other and to the relationship that creates.
Great. So we've talked about these emotionally charged experiences and these emotionally fulfilling experiences. So for churches themselves, how can they move to be able to, I guess, incorporate these kinds of experiences into them? You already talked about a little bit about relationship, and can you think of any others as well?
I think it's trial and error,
Okay.
really. I think it's seeing what works and seeing what doesn't work, and what works in my church might not work in your church. And so I think it's being open to things that aren't going to work, but being willing to try them. And so I think it also goes with the gifts that are in the congregation. So if we have no painters in my congregation, it makes no sense to have someone paint on Sunday morning.
Right.
But if we have someone who can write poetry, but we're not using that, well, try it out. Let's see how it goes. So I really think it's trial and error.
Right, yes. I'm sure a lot of people have had things that kind of fell flat in worship.
Yeah,
and
of course.
Yeah, I guess being willing to do that and being able to be willing to use that kind of worship hour as an experiment and being willing to grow from those failures or when you fall flat on your face.
Right.
If something didn't work, but
yeah, and knowing that the reason that we gather for worship is to honor and praise and glorify God, I think has to be at the center of why we try things, and why we are okay if they don't work out, is to know that this isn't for us. It's not to make our church the most appealing, but to be authentic in our offerings to God.
Great. So as we've talked about all these great worship experiences, and so can you tell any more about how you would, if you were to gather like a group of people together, any tips or ideas you would give them to craft these kinds of worship services that we've been talking about?
I would say just don't be afraid to experiment and to put things in an order you might not be used to, or add an element that might seem a little bit overwhelming, but try it anyway. To just not squelch what God is trying to do. I think that's where it's a dangerous area, when we are afraid to allow God to take what we have and to, use it to ways that we're not expecting. And so, yeah, just try it. Go for it. Give it a try.
Right.